You're listening to Bigger Than Belief, real stories about real faith with real people whose belief is unbelievable. I'm your host, Adam Duxter. Thanks for joining us on Bigger Than Belief. Today is Thursday, January 8th, and today we have a really fascinating guest joining the podcast who I think is coming on at a really good and timely moment. His name is Osamoh, and his life has taken him from the UK to the US, where he now lives in Minnesota. He's got a background in law enforcement, originally over with the British police and then with the Mall of America. But the last decade, he's spent growing a consulting business that helps places of worship across the state of Minnesota and beyond remain secure and stay safe and keep everyone inside protected. And it's a really timely conversation, I think, to have today. I think folks will really enjoy hearing from him and what he has to say. So without further ado, Osamoh. Well, we now welcome on a very special guest, someone I've known for a while now and have had the privilege to get to know. And I'm excited for you all to hear his story. As Osamoh, the president and founder of Kingswood Security Consulting right here in Minnesota. But story is just so cool. Simon, thank you for joining us.
Adam, it's an honor and pleasure. When you mentioned this podcast, I've just been excited to come and have this conversation with you. So thank you for inviting me.
You know, it's so cool is I wonder if there's podcast listeners right now. The first time I talked to you on the phone, I'll never forget. I said, whoa.
Yes, yeah, it does catch people off guard, that's for sure, my accent, yes.
And it's an easy way to talk about who you are when you hear your accent, right? Because your story does not start here in Minnesota or even the United States. How would you explain to people just a little bit about your upbringing and kind of how you even got to the point where you were even considering coming to America?
Yeah, and I think the first thing I would say is that I think I was destined to be here. This was part of my journey. This wasn't a fluke for me to be an English person in Minnesota. And I should say now a British American person in Minnesota. I became a citizen in 2022, a very proud moment. But for the listeners that aren't watching the video, so I'm Black English. My mother is white. My dad is Black Nigerian. My mother met my father in the 70s in England, which was a time when it wasn't really that common for a white woman to fall in love with a black man, but she did. Fell in love, got married. They moved to Nigeria, which I can only imagine what it was like for my mum as a white woman moving to Nigeria in the early 70s. That must have been a real cultural shock for her there. But over time, she realised that my father wasn't the man that she thought she was. I think there was a lot of adultery. I think there was some addiction in there. And she really ended up leaving my dad in the middle of the night with my two sisters. She was around eight and a half months pregnant with me at the time. She left in the middle of the night with my two sisters, went to the British Embassy, and they said, we'll get you on a plane back to England, and we suggest that you never come back here. And that's really what my mother did. I think in today's modern world, I'm 47 for the listeners. I think in today's modern world, there's no way the British Embassy would most probably have done that. Too much red tape, too much bureaucracy. But my mum had to really flee an abusive relationship. And my great aunt's husband at the time was a reverend in the Methodist church who went to live in sort of, if people can think of England, I went to live in like the vicarage, the sort of the house associated with church. We moved in with them. And that was really when my faith journey began, because we lived with them for a few years before my mother got her own home. So scripture and faith became part of life. But at the same time, even to this day now, my dear mother is 80, going about to turn 84 in England. She's never remarried. So I never had a father figure in my life. My mother has Mavis, Maxine, Marilyn. She's got three sisters, so I've got three aunts. So it's always been a very sort of female-dominated family. And for me, growing up and around faith, I've always been a believer, but there's been times where I've drifted from the Lord for sure. As you question these deep questions, why me? Why was I the person that grew up without a father? As you get to a teenager and your friends are playing sports with their father, or they're just playing catch or whatever it is, and you feel left out, it's hard to, or it's easy to challenge the Lord and say, why was I in this position? Why wasn't it someone else? And I know now through my story, Adam, that it was really, it was destined because the Lord knew that I had the sort of a grit, determination to push through, and then it ultimately changed my future. So that was sort of a little bit about my upbringing, that there was a strong faith, but there was a lot of tension between why have these circumstances happened to me and the abandonment that comes from not having a father figure. Why? What is it about me that my father didn't like, that he never pursued me as an individual? Why didn't he just try to come back and figure out where was his son? So a lot in there to unpack, Adam, for sure.
Because was there a point in your childhood where you had any contact with dad, or how did that go?
Yeah, and that's been really, that's another sort of key piece as well, because there's been no contact from my father at all. We're not too sure. We believe I was born in 78. We believe in around 84 he may have passed away. Not too sure. We do have no contact outside of the family. And as I mentioned, my mum never remarried. So there's been this sort of big void. And there's just been unknowing that there has been times where I've suffered racism, or someone's made comment about my last name. And often it's hard because it's like, well, I'm having racism for something I don't even know. It's a part of my life. The Nigerian side of my family is something that I know very little about. So it's really hard when people have identified my ethnicity in a negative way. It brings back those memories as to, well, this is for a father I never knew, right? So I'm suffering racism because I'm black in skin color that I can't control. And it's because of a person that I've never met. Or when someone's commented on my name not being English, again, it's because of someone I've never met. So but there's been a lot in there to sort of to wrestle with, even my ethnicity in this. It's just a big part of my life. I don't know. Yeah.
You talked about your faith kind of ebbing and flowing a little bit. Was there a moment in either childhood or your teenage years or even your early 20s, I guess, when did things kind of become real for you as far as your faith, where you said, this is not just what is happening around me, like this is my own?
Yeah, and I think a key turning point was, everyone watches the cop shows on TV, right? I mean, we all love a good sort of cop show. And around 14, I started to have a strong interest in law enforcement and being a police officer. And I was honoured and privileged enough. I actually joined the British Police at 19, which is really young. Became a detective at 22, which is also very young. And where it became clear to me that the Lord was prompting and guiding me is that I've had many mature men that have given me advice and wisdom. As an example, I think it was around 2001, I'd applied for a firearms team to be on the firearms team at my police department in England. And the chief of police would normally sign your application. That chief of the station was away. So there was a gentleman called Melvin Young, who was a detective chief superintendent. So in English terms, that's a very high-ranking police officer. I'd applied for the firearms team and I was at home, wasn't working that day. And he called me and said, can you come into work? And I was like, well, it's my day off. It's my day off, sir. Is there something that I've done wrong? He said, no, can you come in and see me? And I came into a station. He said, look, I've got your application for the firearms team. I think you do really well. But I've been watching you. I've been observing. I've been getting reports about you. I think you'd be a much better detective. And at the time, I was like 20 years old, 21 years old. And it was sort of, with respect, sir, that's not a decision that I sort of, that's sort of not what I want to do in my career. And then a couple of weeks passed. And then another senior ranking officer called Mark Jones, that was sort of one of my two line above supervisors. He then reached out and said, hey, Simon, the deadline for the detectives is in like an hour, and I've heard you haven't applied. And I'm like, well, yes, I don't intend to apply. And he said, you didn't get the conversation with Melvin Young, did you? I said, no, what did I miss? And he said he wasn't asking you to apply, he was telling you to apply, meaning that he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And ultimately, that was the right decision to become a detective. I was commended, I think, 12 times in my 13-year career there for good investigative work. And so the Lord was there putting strong men in my life, when I was craving this father figure, what I wasn't realizing, I look back now, is that the Lord was putting me strong men in my life that were guiding me, were course correcting me, and telling me what they saw in me. And that was that was a sort of key turning point when I thought about that. I don't have a father, yes, but there's men that are willing to step in and fill that void and share that encouragement with me. Yeah.
I'm trying to imagine life as a detective with the British police, and just some of the things that you saw and the life that was like. I mean, what stands out to you when you think back to that time? Because I know you were working, to take down organized crime. I mean, we're talking terrorism. We're talking the whole gamut here. What do you remember about that time?
Yeah, and another key turning point. So I joined the police in 1998, and this is 2001, Adam. So this is just before I became a detective. There was a woman that was originally from Iran, was in domestic violence with her husband. And I would go around to the house, and the husband would assault her, arrest the husband, would be released, or she wouldn't make a complaint. That sort of cycle that you understand around domestic violence. And I can remember I left as a young police officer one day, and I still get emotional telling this story 25 years later. I left the house one day and I said, I think the next time I'm going to come here, the husband's going to have killed her. And I got the call one day to go round there. And basically, I won't tell all the gory details to your listeners, but the husband had basically killed his wife, and she died in my arms. And I remember I just looked at her, I said a prayer, and the depth of responsibility that I saw, being the last person that she saw on this earth was me. I knew that I had to pray to the Lord, and I just stroked her hair and just said, it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay, as she eventually slipped away. And so I think there's been several moments like that, Adam, in my life where it's told me that law enforcement is hard. Being a police officer is hard. You're seeing people on their worst day. You're seeing victims in front of you, and sometimes there's not many things that you can do. But those incidents shape me that you can't save everyone in this life, but you've got to try. You've got to do what you can to change the system. And that poor lady that lost her life, that was a broken system. So for me as a Christian, it was really hard because you want to do more. You want to get her out of a cycle, but the system wasn't there to set up and help. So sometimes what you see in law enforcement can really challenge you, can really challenge your faith, because there's a different way, but it's not something that you can control, and you just have to play your part in a small way by just doing the small things. And on that particular incident, by just stroking this woman's hair and saying a prayer over her, she died in my arms. In a way, I was instilling faith into her life, and I knew nothing really about where her faith journey was. I just knew that it was important for me to do that. And there's some people that I tell that are atheists or tell that story to, and they say, well, you shouldn't have done that, Simon. That wasn't your role to do that as a professional person, but I saw it as my role as a Christian to help that woman as she passed to the next life.
That seems like a moment that would just stick with you forever. And even now I can see all these years later, like you say, how emotional that is. I mean, that has to be a moment that changes you moving forward. Yeah.
And it was one of the times also, as I mentioned, I joined law enforcement when I was very young. I mean, that was 2001 when we approached in 2026, and it was 25 years later. It was the one and only time when I couldn't sleep. I went home that night and just laid awake and just relived it. So I get emotional now. Just relived it time and time again. And so these things do stay with you, but they're also catalysts for future. There's also a catalyst for how you interact with other people. It's also a catalyst to have that understanding that not everyone has life easy. Everyone is battling in some way. And it's just important for me as a Christian man to what can I do to either lead people closer to the Lord or just show them that, by how we live our lives is Christ focused?
You have a story that you've shared with me a little bit about one of the folks that you came into encounter with during your police detective career, where, I mean, the work was hitting so close to home.
Yeah.
And in this instance, it really seemed like this person, this individual had it out for you.
Yeah.
And I'd love for you to share that story with our listeners and just kind of how that was and then what went on from there.
Yeah. And what I've learned through my faith journey is that the Lord often gives us these little God prompts. That's what my pastor calls them, God prompts. You have these little prompts. You don't often see them at the time, but perhaps when you reflect back, like I mentioned, with having an absent father, the Lord placed strong men in my life. Through the case of Michael Long, it was very much like that. So I was a young detective. My sergeant came to me one day and said, I've got a case for you. You're going to really hate this guy, but I think you're the right person to do this investigation. I can remember thinking to myself, well, that's a bit harsh, but this person was at that time a serial fraudster. Was in their sort of late 20s, early 30s, had spent 10 years in and out of incarceration, and by all accounts was a sort of not a very nice individual. And this gentleman's name was called Michael Long. And I went around to did this sort of investigation, went around to do the arrest. And the first I can remember about him was he said to me, he said, "This isn't what you do." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He says, "You don't come around and arrest me. You ring me, and I come and buy an appointment." And I was thinking, you must have got the wrong script here. This isn't really how law enforcement operates. You don't tell me that you want to come in. We come around and arrest you. So that was the first sort of indication of like this sort of cat and mouse. And then through the investigation, I learned that he was someone, why my supervisor was so apprehensive about him is that he'd previously infiltrated his life. He would do tactics like he would sit outside his home when his wife was going shopping. He would sit there to make sure that he knew where they lived. So he used to use a lot of intimidation tactics. He did that against me. He found out where I lived. During interviews, he would make disclosures about, your mother Margaret, does she still live at this certain address? Indicating to me that he knew where my family lived. We had information from a police informant that was saying that Simon, me as the officer, I'd seized one of his vehicles and it was on our police compound. If that vehicle wasn't returned to him, that he knew where my mother lived and he was going to send some people around there to basically beat up my mother and do some terrible things. So this was a sort of bad individual. And then, things like he clearly had me followed at one point because he knew what time I went to work. He knew the route I went to work. He knew where I shopped. And, so he'd gone to great lengths to find information out about me with the sole intent to use that against me in some way. And then when I would interview him, a formal police interview, during conversation, he would drop in information about my personal life just so I knew that he knew who I was and where my family lived and this type of stuff, so not a very nice individual at all. And then charged him. He went to prison for 5 years for my offences. And then, as you mentioned earlier, briefly, Adam, I then moved into organised crime. So I was a sort of a covert police officer doing organised crime and some terrorism cases. And then when Michael came out of prison, he'd get arrested. He'd have like my home address in his pocket. They would figure out who I was. Police officers would reach out to me and say, "Hey, we just arrested this bad individual. He's got your home address in his pocket, just letting you know." And I was like, that's what Michael does. He rules on like intimidation. And he really became like my nemesis. And people in around the station would call him my nemesis. And every time he got arrested, I would do everything in my power to make sure he goes back to jail, and I would tell investigating officers what had worked for me, what hadn't worked, and what can I do to help. So everyone knew that Michael Long was my nemesis. And then fast forward me emigrating here to America in 2011. So this was around 2003, 2004 when this was really occurring. And I emigrated here to the US in 2011. Around 5 years later in 2016, one of my friends who was a detective reached out to me, sent me an article that Michael Long was out of prison, had turned his life to faith, and he was starting a non-profit to help the homeless. And my friend sent me this article and said, he's up to his old tricks again, committing fraud, he's robbing these people. And I said, well, I can't really see it. I'm on the board of a non-profit. I know how difficult it is to get money from people. It's like getting money from a stone. I was like, where's the angle? And Adam, I do not know why, but the Lord gave me a God prompt and said, ring him up and find out. So I was sat in my office. I went online. Wasn't too difficult. I'm an ex-detective after all. I found his number. And it was about 6:30 in the morning when I was sat at my desk in my corporate job. I called and instantly I recognized his voice and I just said, is that Michael Long? He said, yes, who is this? And I said, you may not remember me, but my name was Simon Osamoh. I said, many years ago, I put you in prison. And then his immediate response was, I remember you, why are you calling me? I said, well, Michael, I said, I'm living in America now, long since left the police, but someone sent me this article of the work that you're doing for the homeless, and I'm just ringing to say, well done, I'm proud of you. And I said that all those years ago, I knew that if you could turn your energy for good rather than bad, you didn't need the crime, you didn't need anything. And Adam, you know what he did? He said, I've got to pull over. He went, pulled to the side of the road, and I could hear him cry down the phone for 3, 4, 5 minutes. He was just in a flood of tears. And when he eventually composed himself, he just said, I can't believe that you would ring me to say that you're proud of me, that I'm turning my life around. And I said, well, Michael said, the past is the past. Just keep walking towards the light. Just keep doing what you're doing. And said, if ever you need my help or assistance, you've got my number. And then as soon as we hung up the call, a text message then came in from Michael and he said, I don't know if your family knew what I was doing to intimidate you, but can you just let your family know that I'm sorry for what I did? And then my dear mother, who's still in England, I told her about what had happened. I told her about what was potentially going to happen to her. And I'd never told her this going back those 2 decades.
She didn't know when he was.
She didn't know. I hadn't told him because the police were sort of controlling it and the police were putting in security measures, and we didn't feel like at that time we needed to sort of really alert my family. So she didn't know, and I told her, and you know what she said, Adam? She said, tell Michael I forgive him. Tell Michael I forgive him. And that was another moment when I called him and said, I've shared with my family, and here's what my mother said. She says that she forgives you, Michael. She forgives you. And that was another key turning moment for him. And then through this story, people got to hear about it. We actually did a BBC interview together. And he called me and said, hey, people are hearing about this story. The BBC want to do an interview. Will you come on and do it? And many of my friends said, don't do it because you can't trust him. And then the Lord gave me another God prompt and said, if not me, then who? If I don't place faith in Michael, who is going to place faith in this career criminal that spent 20 years in and out of incarceration? And we did the BBC interview together. It was very respectful. It was very well done conversation. They were really intrigued as to how we'd got together. And then a couple of months after, Adam, Michael said when he was in prison, and he still hasn't published the book, but he said, when I was in prison, he said, I wrote a book, and the book is called There Is a Way Out. And he said, Simon, can you read the book and give me any encouragement, any changes that you'd suggest? And Adam, I read the book, and on the very first page in the prelude, I realized why the Lord had connected us all those years ago. And it said in the prelude, it said, all I ever wanted was the validation of my father, and it never came. And the bigger crime that I did, the bigger validation that I got from my peers. And it hit me why the Lord had made him my nemesis, and we'd had this back and forth, is that we were both the same. We were two scared little boys seeking the validation of a father that never came. We just took two different paths. So there's men like me that have an absent father, and there's men like Michael that have a father who's present, who's absent in their life. And the Lord was really revealing to me that we were exactly the same. And it was another God prompt that changed my life, where I now say, if not me, then who? And then in 2019, I was in the UK, met some friends, and it was around 1 o'clock in the morning. I was coming off the subway in London, and a person came out the bush and stood in front of me. I was thinking, I'm going to be robbed here. This is 1 o'clock in the morning. This doesn't look good. And this person said to me, do you have any money? And I paused. And then the Lord gave me God prompts, and the God prompt was, if not me, then who? And I said to this individual, I said, generally don't have any money to give you, but I said, what I do have is time. I said, I'd love to learn about your story as to why you're here. And he was a little bit like taken aback, as if to say, my story, what do you mean? And he was a sort of late teenager, early 20s. He had told me how his brother got him addicted onto drugs. When he got addicted onto drugs, his family then kicked him out. When they kicked him out, he became homeless. Then he started selling drugs. Then he started robbing people to find money and all this type of stuff. And I just listened to his story for like 20 minutes. It's pitch black, like 1 o'clock in the morning in the fall in England. And we're having this conversation. And then he put his head on my shoulder and he started crying. And I said, what are you crying for? And he said, you're the first person today that's made me actually feel like I'm a person and that you've listened to me. And that was all because of the Michael Long. If not me, then who? If I'm not going to lean into this difficult situation, then who is? If Michael hadn't happened, I wouldn't have had that experience with that person who was clearly broken, was hurting and needed support and just needed someone to look at them and listen to their story. That wouldn't have happened if Michael hadn't really changed my faith path, my faith journey to really reconnect. Michael Long today, Adam, is one of my best friends. And what's been super powerful about it is through the wonders of social media on Facebook, I've had hardened criminals that have reached out and said, Simon, you don't know who I am. I'm like, oh, I know exactly who you are. And they're like, you don't know who I am, but we've seen the transformation in Michael and I want that same transformation. Can you help me? Wow. And these are hardened criminals. So it's just showed me, Adam, that a lot of these men, they're searching. Like I said, for me, I realized that when I read Michael's book, we were two scared little boys seeking the validation of a father. We just took very different paths. So we were more similar than what I'm actually giving us credit for. And I think that's why the Lord connected us all those years prior.
Yeah. I feel like it's so easy for people to look at someone who is involved in crime or look at someone who would be approaching them at 1 a.m. and have a certain view of them. But it seems like your view has been totally shifted. I mean, how is your view on humanity and people changed just through these lived experiences for you?
Yeah, I mean, I do believe that the Lord has a plan for us long before, we even enter the world. And I don't believe that plan is homelessness. I don't believe that plan is addiction. I don't believe that plan is, sort of sexual purity or impurity. I think the free will that God gives us sometimes can change how we interact with the world. So knowing that God has a positive plan for us, it's really important for me to have more empathy towards situations. We're all dealing with something, and I think from my time in law enforcement in the UK to the Michael Long journey, I think it's just reminded me that everyone doesn't have life easy. Everyone is struggling with something. And honestly, for me, sometimes, Adam, it's a bit of a red flag if someone says, oh, my life is together, I'm fine, I'm good. And quite often it's like, well, where do you need help? Where do you need help? So it's given me a lot more empathy towards the situation because it's so easy. And I think perhaps that being cynical from sort of long-term serving police officers, it's very easy to become cynical and just say, this person is going to rob me. But from very quickly to turn it to, if not me, then who? If I'm not going to talk to the person who is, to hearing his story, my entire impression changed of him just because I heard some of the trauma, and the challenges that it had in his life. So I think it makes me have more empathy. The shortest passage in the Bible is Jesus wept. And I think when I hear some of these stories, that's what my mind goes to is Jesus wept. This is tough brokenness. And we just need to have a bit more empathy for some of these people because I don't believe that God had that path, but God gave us free will. And sometimes that can change the outcomes of our lives.
Yeah, like you said, two different paths at some point. Did you ever think you would live in the United States?
No, but again, I honestly didn't. And funny enough, I'm kid you not, this is God's honest truth. I didn't even know where Minnesota was the first time I came here. So my wife is American. I'm from the Twin Cities. That's what brought me here to Minnesota. I didn't know where Minnesota was the first time, but I see it in my path now, because when I emigrated here, I was head of counterterrorism at Mall of America, which is a high-profile security position, 42 million visitors per year. It's bigger than Disney. Now it's like 7.2 million square feet, something like that, 700 stores, tourist attraction, terrorism focal point, all that type of stuff. So I was head of counterterrorism there, and because it's a high-profile position, I used to get invited quite a lot to speak at different conferences. And I spoke at a conference called, I think it's NSC4, NCS4, I forget which way the acronym's around. It's basically all the security leaders from the NHL, NBA, NFL. It's a sort of sports leaders conference. And I was talking at this conference in Disney, and this was sort of 2013, so before like everyone silenced their phones as much. And it was lucky because my phone wasn't on silent. I got on stage, and I got off stage, and my phone, a call came in, I answered it. And it was the Lakeville Police Department here in Minneapolis. And they said, "We know you're a Christian. We know you're a national security expert. We've got a church that we think you can help." And I said, what many people still say to this day: why does the church need my help? And I went there one Wednesday, and the Lord really revealed two things for me. One, there was a real need for biblically based security risk management, to look at risk management in churches through the lens of Scripture. And second, he really said, "Simon, I gave you all the skills and attributes to keep my churches safe." And as we've met before, Adam, over a decade later, we have clients in 16 states, and as what we're nationally known for is helping nonprofits. So I didn't think I was ever going to live in America, but I see the reason why I did, because the Lord wanted to use me to help keep churches safe, and I've been on that mission ever since. So that was another God prompt.
So that's 2013. And how does that go and grow from there? Because I'm guessing the job at the mall, which, by the way,
Yes.
Taking a step back, I mean, you just rattled off those numbers about the Mall of America. Like it's just, I think even when you live here in Minnesota and you go to the mall, just as an aside, you don't have the respect for how serious the work is behind the scenes. Are you able to say anything just about your time there? Because I think for our Minnesotan listeners, that is, I mean, they don't even grasp the level. I know I don't, of the level of security at that place.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a few incidents in recent years. There's been a couple of shootings there. There was a poor tragedy where a young child was thrown from the third floor. But I would still say for the 30 years now the mall has been open, they're smaller incidents compared to what could have happened. The mall very much invest in finding the right people, training the right way. There's a heavy, heavy influence in training. Even when I joined, really, you might say as a senior manager, I think I had 60 people under me at one point there. Even I went through the officer programs. So when someone wants to start as a security officer, I went through that program. When someone wants to join the counterterrorism team, I went through that program. So training is a big sort of part of the culture to make sure that everyone has the skills needed in those emergencies. I think the second thing I'd say where the mall is super, super strong is having a strong security culture. And I know you've covered that before in some of your stories. It's really important that security isn't just for me as the head of counterterrorism. Security is for everyone. So whether it was the CEO walking around on a lunch break to a custodian, everyone is pre-programmed. If you see something which you think is out of place, our culture is that we raise the flag immediately and then we look to resolve that situation. So speed is a great asset for a safety and security team. So strong security culture, strong training, getting the right people, and just having strong layers of protection, lots of layers of security. The bike team, the K9 team, Bloomington Police are in there, having a counterterrorism team, an intelligence analyst. The mall puts so much into it to make sure their community is safe. Yeah, it's still, I would say, I travel a lot around the US. It's still one of the best security programs that I've ever come across in my time in the US, for sure.
And it's a great job that you had at that time.
Yeah.
And you get this call from Lakeville,
Yeah.
and you say, okay, I'll do this. And you take that meeting. I mean, how long did it take for you to say, there is actually a career in this line of work to help places of worship find and develop security plans?
Yeah, and I think perhaps we sort of touched on it surrounding, my faith, maybe, having empathy, my experience. Because what I found, and the Sound of Church in Lakeville was that church, and they're still one of my longest standing clients today, is most security consultants would be saying, we might have a sex offender program inside our church, but we also have a children's ministry. So in the secular world, the atheist world, someone was like, we shouldn't be doing that. You can't have sex offenders in a building when it's children. Well, that's the mission of the church, right? Is to believe that there's no sin that our God cannot forgive, and to help grow these people in their faith and help them on that rehabilitation. So you can't say to a church, you can't have sex offenders inside your church just because the risk is too high. We have to look at it and say, pastor, religious leader, let's do the sex offender program on a Monday. Let's do your preschool on a Tuesday, so they're not in the building at the same time. So what I sort of really learned was that a lot of my peers were just saying, well, you just shouldn't be doing that. That's just too high risk. Well, in the church, we're about rehabilitation. We're about leading people on that journey. If someone's a convicted murderer, are they welcome in a church? 99.9% of those churches are going to say, that's the person that the Lord is calling us to, those broken ones. I think what I really found, Adam, and it might sound bad, is a lot of my peers, and perhaps still do, they would say, well, you just shouldn't be doing those programs. They're inherently risky. I would say we understand that that's risk, but how do we bring in an appetite so you can fulfill and do the programs that you want? Even by church, just having like a divorce care program where it could be a woman is in domestic violence. She has a court order against her husband. He's not allowed to see her or his children. Where does he know she's going to be? She's going to be at a church on a Tuesday evening. Is it possible that he might come to a church? It's possible, but if he comes, what types of mood is he going to be in? So we're not going to say we're not going to do that divorce care clinic on the basis that these are women in domestic violence, so their spouses might come to a church. We're going to say, how do we do that mission, but make sure those women are safe and make sure the church is safe? So I think that's really what the Lord revealed to me is there's a different way. That's what I said, biblically based security management. There's a different way to look at how we can live our lives and how do we do it in a Christ-like way. So we're not saying no to those hurt and broken people. We're just saying, how do we bring that risk with an appetite? Or how do we make sure everyone is safe and secure?
What was the point where you said, this is my full-time job? This can be my full-time job to create this as a company.
Yeah.
This isn't just me as an aside.
Yeah.
I've got enough clients here to where this could support my family and really grow as a full-time gig.
Yeah, and that's, the word God prompt is strong throughout this. So Kingswood Security Consulting is primarily focused on risk management for nonprofits. And I was in corporate America, and I woke up one morning and the Lord really said to me, you're playing it safe. And I was thinking, did I hear right? But the Lord said, Simon, you're playing it safe. And I started to have this sort of message, this sort of current behind what I was doing for the next couple of months as to, well, am I playing it safe? Am I drifting? Can I offer more? And I can remember I went to my wife and I said, the Lord is saying I should be doing my Kingswood Security Consulting full time. And she says, well, when's he revealing you're going to do that? And I was like, today. And she said, well, maybe take time to think about it before you sort of lose that, high six-figure salary and career. And I thought about it for a day and I went back and said, no, the Lord is saying that I'm playing it safe and I should be doing my consulting full time. And that is really what I do. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I took a massive, massive financial risk by going from a high six-figure salary down to zero. But I had the belief that I really felt the Lord was calling me to saying, I've been guiding you. I've been correcting you. I've been giving strong men in your life. I've been giving you these Michael Long stories. I've been giving you this person you thought was going to rob you and be showing your way. Trust me. Take that foot off the boat, step onto the water, and trust me. And the Lord has been very faithful to me ever since. Have I shown faithfulness to the Lord and to the mission? And obviously, my relationships grew with churches, not only here and just in Minnesota, across the US. And I think the Lord was really revealing to me, I've given you all the attributes. You understand my churches now. It's time for you to step out. So yeah, it was a brave moment, a very brave moment. Yeah.
And when we talk about even the last decade, securing places of worship, whether it's a synagogue, a mosque, a church, you name it, we have seen attacks across the board. You talk about securing places of worship. There have been attacks, across the country, and then even here within the last 6 months locally. What is it about places of worship that makes it such a target, you think, when you start looking at shootings or people going in with bad intentions just to hurt people?
Yeah, and part of it is around displacement. So you sort of go back to, sort of 2010, 2011 on. That was a real turning point in schools where school security became more prominent and more secure. So most schools now have safety films on their windows, even sort of a lot of private Christian education schools. A lot of schools now will have sort of secure vestibules where someone has to check in. They'll start having identification, like a visitor management system, and they'll have a little bit more of a structured emergency operations plan. Now, a lot of those areas need to be tweaked in many schools, but that's become like the sort of a foundation, the norm. So what that then does is that starts to displace those extremists, those criminals, those mental illness. It starts to displace them somewhere else. I don't like naming individuals, but in 2015, at the AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina, a young 21-year-old went to a weeknight Bible study in a predominantly African-American church, killed 9 people. He said that he wanted to go to a school, but school security was too strong. So he found the next historical place where he said he was a white supremacist, was a prominent African-American church in Charleston, South Carolina, goes in and kills 9. So from his own words, he said, hey, security in these schools is too good, so we've got to go to a soft target. So a soft target like a house of worship is, most churches still aren't closing or locking their doors, either outside of worship or during worship hours. A lot of churches aren't fully understanding the risk that they have from their programming that they're doing. So these individuals are looking for more headcount. So where do you find those individuals? You find them at places like houses of worship that have large and strong congregations, because they're looking for high impact, high headcount. So there's a lot of displacement which has gone on, Adam. And there's also the type of environment, being open door, soft targets, is also attracting those criminals.
I think that for so many people in our community, the tragedy that we saw at Annunciation this year really opened their eyes to this kind of topic, just because it's so heartbreaking and heart-wrenching, especially when it happens so close to home. When you think about that day, as someone who's made this now your life's work, I mean, what do you remember about that day?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, I'm a father of two sons, one in middle school, one in high school. So every day when they go to school, I'm entrusting the school district where we live to keep my kids safe. So it reminds me that there is more to be done. And it reminds me, Adam, even in my position, how simple sometimes these attacks really are. They have to get it right once. We have to get it right every day. And it's just a tragic moment in and around school safety where these young kids were in worship. They were worshiping the Lord, and something so bad could happen to them. So yeah, many reflections, but it makes me think about my own family, but more so how simple these attacks are, but also looking at who had a say, and it was the pathway to violence. That individual was clearly hurting, was in pain. There were some indications of obsession with mass shootings and with gun crime. And the biggest thing for me, Adam, on these incidents is how do we get to these people sooner? How do we get to them before they walk into a school, a church, and carry out this mass attack? And I wish I had the answer for that. I don't. But I just know we've got to get to these individuals soon because we don't want them to walk into a church or a school. We want to try and disrupt them before their mindset is made. That is what I'm going to do.
You mentioned it a little bit before, but how many places are you working with, or how have you worked with? Where are they?
Yeah.
Like how far has this this business model grown at this point?
Yeah. So I mean, we have clients in 16 states now, and I think this year, it's hard to say the number, but most probably 20 different clients that are out of state. So we have over 1,000 non-profit clients now. Our mailing list is somewhere between 8 and 10,000. And every week, maybe we can put this in the show notes, Adam, every week we send out church crimes from across the country. So my team will summarize crimes that have occurred from the previous week, and then we send that out in a PDF. So it can help sort of encourage and create awareness surrounding what is going on there. So, we have a wide footprint, and we're helping people with everything from conducting a vulnerability assessment, which is looking at what are all their vulnerabilities around their administrative program, emergency operations plan. Do they have a threat assessment team? Have they training? Have they doing background checks? Have they dealing with medical? How they dealing with visitors? So everything around the sort of the document, the governance behind their program. Then we'll actually go on site to a church, and we do this out of state as well. We'll go on site to a church. We'll do a building review of the windows, doors, locks, the direction, and then we'll look at all their security technology. Do they have things like access control, surveillance cameras, mass notification? And then we'll give them a comprehensive report. So that's what a lot of non-profits and churches are starting with, because it's really hard for them to understand, well, what are our vulnerabilities and what do we prioritize if you don't know what your universe is? So a vulnerability assessment is a great way to help them understand, here's everything laid out, then where are we going to focus on for the next 1 to 2 to 5 years, and how can we sort of create our strategic roadmap around that? So that's a big part of what we do, is helping organizations, particularly non-profit organizations, just understand what are our vulnerabilities. We can't respond if we don't know what they are. So yeah, a very strong footprint growing, and it's been a blessing to see how the Lord has moved us, but primarily we're doing deep dive into organizations' vulnerabilities.
Did you ever think when you got that call 12 years ago that this is the extent it would grow to?
No, I mean, I felt early on with churches, I'm smiling because you help one church and then another church, then another church, then another church. And particularly early on, I wasn't charging clients for this as well, I should say. So, the Lord knows that you have to earn money to pay Caesar. So I don't mind saying to people that, these are paid services, how we help nonprofits. But there definitely came a point where it was not even a God prompt. It was super clear that this is where the Lord wanted us. And one of my Amazon best-selling books is called Securing Church Operations. There's a 7-step plan we have. I was working with a woman called Karen at a Catholic church in San Diego. And she was close to quitting because she couldn't get the impact she wanted. She had no support, no budget. And that was when I really said, well, rather than just go in and give consultative advice, we need to teach them a program and a system, which is why I created the 7 steps. I took someone that was wanting to leave the church because she was so overwhelmed and frustrated, to her saying, I think there's a path forward. And her program to this day is flourishing. And that was another moment where it was like, hey, I'm making an impact here. I'm making a change, and that's when I realised that this is a sustainable model, because I understand the church. The Lord has prepped me with the right background, and we can make a difference here.
What would you want someone to take away from hearing your story? Because it is almost like 4 different stories in once when you start talking about even what we've just been talking about now. What would you want someone to know or to take away from hearing from you?
Yeah, I think forgiveness redemption. A lot of what my mind, there's been key prompts that the Lord has given me. But I always come back to the Michael Long story, forgiveness and redemption. That changes how I interact with other people. You know, we do live in a society which can be considered dangerous. Most of us have some type of natural bias, and it's easy to sort of look outwardly and judge someone. But I think until we really understand their story, we don't know the journey that they had. And then that allows me in my work to be very open-minded and say, okay, I understand the challenges they have and what you're doing. Here's what has worked at other places. Maybe this might work with you. So I think sort of redemption and forgiveness are two things that have been prevalent through my life, and they also help shape me, because it allows me not to judge the organisations. It'd be very easy, Adam, for me. I can walk in any organisation and find 30 things wrong by the time I've taken my shoes off. But to just push those on, no, it doesn't really help those people. I've got to listen and understand and not judge, and just say, okay, what can we do to help you here? So I think those are two words: redemption and forgiveness.
I've always heard, what is it? You hate the things that you fear, and you fear the things you don't understand. Yeah. And it's really interesting hearing you talk about the moment you understood, this criminal. Yeah, that hatred or the fear or all of it was gone because you understood them. So that's super remarkable. Where can people find your work?
Yeah, so our consulting company is just Kingswood Security Consulting. So the website is kingswoodsc.com. And the email is just team@kingswoodsc.com. If anyone's got any questions or want to continue this conversation, I'm always willing and open to listen. So kingswoodsc.com or team@kingswoodsc.com if they want to send me an email.
And then you mentioned you've got some books out, right?
Yes, so most of the things you can find on my website, but I've got sort of prominent to this conversation. I've got a book called Securing Church Operations. Hated writing at school, but the Lord blessed me with an Amazon bestseller there. I've got a book on de-escalation, 10 powerful strategies for conflict de-escalation. Recently wrote a book about how to survive a mass shooting. So if anyone's interested, you can just type my name into Amazon and my book should pop up.
Simon, I was looking forward to this. It did not disappoint. Thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your story with our listeners.
Well, Adam, got to know you the last few years, and it was a blessing for me to be invited to come on this podcast. So I really hope your listeners have taken something away from my journey, and I'll talk to you soon.
Folks, I just want to say thank you again so much for taking some time out of your day to listen to Bigger Than Belief. And if this is your first time joining us, welcome. We're really glad to have you here. This show is all about talking about faith and belief in a way that is relevant and honest and true, but also easy to understand. Take a layered concept and boil it down to a personal story in hopes to understand the person in helping understand the faith. This show is only successful because of you. So if you know someone that you think would be enjoying this type of content, please send this to them. You can also follow us wherever you get your podcasts and rate us 5 stars. We've got some really cool episodes coming up in the new year, and so we're really excited to bring those to you. Again, new episodes released every single Thursday wherever you get your podcasts. Folks, see you next week.